In this presentation, you will learn about the critique of cultural nationalism. Nation. Before understanding the critique part of cultural nationalism, we need to first learn about nation. The Cambridge Dictionary discusses nation as a country, especially when thought of as a large group of people living in one area with their government, language, traditions, etc. There are different kinds of ideologies on which governments operate within a nation, like democracy, communism, dictatorship, socialism, and capitalism. However, all these isms are constantly affected by the cultural practices of the people. Every country has its own history, journey, mistakes, conflicts, approaches. Some turn out to be successful, and some are on the path towards it. Nationalism. According to Collins Dictionary, nationalism is the desire for the political independence of people who feel they are historically or culturally a separate group within a country. One who practices nationalism is called a nationalist. In his essay of 1945, George Orwell discusses nationalist, where he points out a nationalist thinks solely or mainly in terms of competitive prestige. His thoughts always turn on victories, defeats, triumphs, and humiliations. He sees history, especially contemporary history, as the constant rise and decline of great power units, and every event that happens seems to him a demonstration that his side is on the upgrade and some hated rival is on the downgrade. One needs to understand here that nationalism is different from patriotism. However, one of the parts of nationalism is patriotism too. Nationalism has the culture and politics within it. Extreme nationalism begins a problem when it creates prejudices against the other groups and nations. In its inclusivity, nationalism is one of the few ideologies common across regional, economic, gender, and cultural differences. Nationalisms that inspired the French to revolt against a tyrannical king in 1789, or of the countless anti-colonial independence movements of the 20th century. Nationalism during COVID-19. Countries closed their airports for foreign travelers. Migrants were seen as a threat in some places even within their own country. New phases of nationalism were visible where some countries stopped their supply of vaccines to another country. Communal feelings were evoked and united fighting against the virus through symbols like a burning lamp, addressing the COVID-infected people as warriors, speeches by prime ministers. It redeveloped the we feeling among people. However, those who didn't receive the benefits were annoyed. Yet, after the independence movement, the COVID-19 was an important phase where India witnessed a new form of nationalism, which social media have further fueled. Throughout the world, nationalism was invoked by the leaders of that country to fight against COVID. Cultural nationalism. Cultural nationalism often occurs in the early phase of a national movement, sometimes before an explicitly political nationalism has appeared. Cultural nationalism is focused on the cultivation of a nation. Here the vision of the nation is not a political organization but a moral community. The key agents of cultural nationalism are intellectuals and artists who seek to convey their nation's vision to the wider community. The need to articulate and express this vision tends to be felt most acutely during times of social, cultural, and political upheaval resulting from an encounter with modernity. Cultural nationalism views that it is through common tradition people are bonded together. The character of a nation is seen best from culture than just from the state as an entity. One of the aims of cultural nationalism is to unite the different aspects of the national culture. According to T.K. Uman, cultural nationalism refers to the articulation of popular aspirations by the people to preserve and nurture their natural bonds rooted in religion, caste, tribe, language, or region. Accordingly to John Hutchinson, cultural nationalism is usually more than a small group of historical scholars and artists concerned to revitalize the community by invoking memories of the nation as an ancient and unique civilization. But periodically it has expanded into a major ideological movement that has tried to regenerate the nation on communitarian lines, challenging both established political nationalist movements and the existing state. Indeed, in many contexts, this grassroots movement has played a central part in nation building. Linguistic nationalism in India and in the 1956 States Reorganization Act. Following independence, India was confronted with integrating the princely kingdoms that surrounded it. After the accession process, India's political map consisted of numerous multilingual presidencies such as Bombay, Punjab, and the United Provinces. Linguistic nationalism in the era of robotics and artificial intelligence is still being used to gain vote banks and create ethnocentric beliefs among the weaker groups by the powerful groups. To a certain extent, preserving one's linguistic identity is necessary. However, preserving the linguistic identity and mob lynching the violators is unethical. The life of a human is above that of language, religion, caste, or class. The movement stands contrary on its own as there is a discussion on the preservation of language. On the other side, the local, regional, tribal languages, schools are being shut down. This is due to the importance given to English and private medium schools. A favorable ecosystem is created for English rather than regional languages. Surprisingly, many people feel ashamed of speaking their regional languages. Another shocking fact is that English is used as a measure of a person's intelligence rather than treating it as a mere language. Origin of cultural nationalism. There are several views over the origin of cultural nationalism. Few scholars point out that the history of cultural nationalism begins in 18th century Europe. Some view it originated among Irish groups. A variety of developments in the realms of ideas, culture, and politics converge at this time to produce what Lesserson refers to as a tipping point, leading to the explosion of cultural nationalism in the 19th century. These developments include the emergence of historicism and Indo-European linguistics, the rise of Romanticism in literature and the arts, and a growing commitment to constitutional politics and the idea of rule by the people. The writings of Johann Gottfried Herder created a new phase of the emergence of cultural nationalism in Europe. Everyone contributed to its emergence, like universities, artists, writers, and musicians. The emergence of cheap wood pulp and printing press led to cultural nationalism as a product for consumption for people. Critiques of cultural nationalism. Cultural nationalism has been criticized time and again by scholars from different disciplines and periods. Let us look into some of the reasons for it. Authoritarian regime. In the name of preserving culture at any given point, a country could turn into a severe form. Authoritarian culture produces a system where people are not able to live life freely. For example, North Korea. A nation shut itself down to other cultures because of dictatorship. The leader becomes the hero, idol, and object of worship and prayer. No internet, mass media is allowed. Those within are monitored thoroughly. The point is the idea of cultural nationalism can go so far that the fundamental rights of human beings are violated. Taliban-owned places where the fundamental rights for women to be educated choice is suppressed. Politics. Cultural nationalism thrives on an ideology of shared culture. There exists within it a political notion of nationalism, and that is problematic. The idea of having nationalism ends diversity and brings about homogeneity. This further turns into an element to prove periodically. There is a test of loyalty that one has to undergo periodically, especially minority groups in a country. This leads to problems and brings tensions. Cultural suppression. Extreme forms of practicing cultural nationalism could lead to suppression. This can occur even in the most developed countries of the world or even underdeveloped countries. Suppression of a group or subgroup and their ideas, values could lead to loss of identity and make generations live with hatred and pain. For example, in Canada, the government took the children from indigenous tribal homes and placed the children in residential schools. As a result, these children were forced to adopt a new culture, learn a new language and way of life. Most importantly, they were separated from their parents. A generation grew with resentment and pain. Still, the indigenous group suffers due to the past. This example shows how, irrespective of being a developed or developing or underdeveloped nation, cultural nationalism is harmful to the peace of society. Use of violence. The problem with cultural nationalism is that any event could be blown up into a political event at any given point of time. In the Indian context, several protests, injustice related to women, girls, have turned into political angle, finally leading to communism and anger. Respecting human values takes a back seat, and the idea of cultural supremacy comes in front. The violators who question the other side of the victims are treated with violence. At times, these are even practiced through goons who are hired for this purpose. Rise of social movement. Kaka, in an interview, points out that basic denial of rights and resources leads to social movements. Culture operates through the principle of homogeneity. When a dominant group tries to impose its culture on the subgroup loses its identity. As a result, the revolt by forming groups leads to many new problems like child soldiers, suicide bombers, conflicts that could run for decades. Enforced nationalism is where you are forced to behave according to the larger group's demand. This is being practiced in different forms and symbols of important national values. The violators who do not follow the nationalism ideals are forced upon them to follow. The dominant political party decides the symbol and enforces it on others. Intellectuals and textbooks. Time and again, the production of knowledge is being monitored by the state. The dominant and favorable ideological thoughts are being conveyed through textbooks for students. Curriculum designing and monitoring the scholars' work and even banning their work is somewhere leading to a half-baked picture of reality. It also closes the individual space to view the other side of the reality and a generation growing up on fake narratives created by biased ideological groups. This has been taking place throughout the world through schools, religiously controlled schools, and other institutions like universities. Universities that are supposed to be powerhouses of knowledge are harmed through privatization, contract teachers who work for as little as rupees 300 to 150 per hour for a class, and the question then becomes survival or knowledge production. Thank you for watching the presentation.